Good evening, everyone. So this is the second class of the Sheep Management Workshop, or online course for small farms program at Cornell. And before we get started on feeds and nutrition, I wanted to just say that I've really enjoyed reading everybody's comments and in the forum on where they're from and the kind of flock they have. We have a huge range in this class from all over the country, California, Florida, Midwest, Michigan, pretty much everywhere, and all kinds of flocks, big flocks, little flocks, wool flocks, meat flocks, even dairy flocks. So it's a little challenging to focus the class to all of you. So I'm going to just try to throw ideas out there, and hopefully you can ask us some individual questions when the time comes and talk in the forums. And it's really, just like I said, it's just really interesting to read what everybody's doing. I also realize we have a lot of wool people, not wool people, but people who are interested in wool in our class. And so I added a bunch of wool resources today. They're at the end of week 1 in the marketing section down below. At the very end, it says wool resources. So I put some there. It's not easy to find good wool resources, I'm finding. But I have a few more that I found today after I got that done, and I will add those to it as well. I've always been pretty focused on the meat end of the business, but I know people that are doing quite a bit. As a matter of fact, on February 1st, I'm doing a webinar with the Vermont Wool Project, and they've done work with wool home insulation and making wool pellets. So they use the pellets for fertilizer, and they sell them by the bag. And I'm anxious to hear what they think of it. So that'll be February 1st. I can share that in the forum or somewhere where you guys can get on if you want to. That's February 1st. It's coming up here in another 10 days or so. Okay, so tonight we're going to talk about feeds and feeding. And because I have a master's degree in nutrition, I think everything revolves around what you feed your sheep and how well you feed them and what kind of feeders you use and how good of a job you do. So if this seems like I'm really stressing nutrition, that's why. You are what you eat, kind of. And we don't normally feed sheep bagels, but my niece used to work at Dunkin' Donuts, and she would sneak out back and grab a bag of the stuff they're throwing out at the end of the day and give the sheep. Got to have donuts and bagels for a treat. I don't recommend that as a heavy diet for your animals, but they appreciated it once in a while. So we're going to talk about feeding basics. And it is 2021. I didn't change the date on my PowerPoint. So what is the best thing to feed sheep? And maybe goats if you have them. Is it corn? Is it alfalfa or byproduct feeds? Pasture? Pasture, boy, if you could have pasture year round, that probably would be the best thing to feed sheep, but most of us don't have that. Commercial sheep grain, you can get that at the feed store. So what do you feed sheep? Basically, what you have to do is feed sheep whatever you have in your area, whatever's available, and is good quality. So you need to be realistic and practical. Now, if I wanted to feed alfalfa to my sheep, it would be hard. I'd have to truck it in from somewhere because we can't grow alfalfa very well around here. And it would be really expensive if I could find some around here. So you might live in an area where alfalfa is cheap and that's what all the hay is. And if you are, you're lucky and you can use that. So you need to think about what's available in your area. And then we're going to learn how to balance ration so that you can make use of that. You also need to think about your facilities and your equipment. I do not have a tractor. I do feed round bales, but I have somebody else come and do the tractor for me, tractor part. And yesterday I managed to get my husband and my daughter's boyfriend to roll a few around by hand for me also, which is possible. Not highly recommended when they're frozen to the ground, but it does work. So think about what you have for facilities and equipment. Are you going to have enough room to put hay in for the year? Are you going to have to buy hay every week or so and go get a pickup truck load? Do you have a huge farm and you're going to buy feed from another neighboring farmer and make a total mixed ration? There's lots of different versions, so you need to look at what you have and what you can do. A lot's going to depend on your flock size. If you have 3 or 4 sheep, it's a lot different than feeding even 30 or 40 or even 300 or 400 or 3,000 or 4,000. Well, quite a bit different approach needed in those different sizes and efficiencies. And again, I mentioned sort of what's available in your area or what you could get brought in. So you need to look at all of those things. The other thing we need to think about is the sheep itself. The sheep are ruminants. That means they have a rumen, and they actually have 4 stomachs. And I'm going to see if I can make the little pointer work here. Laser pointer. Yeah, look at that. So here's the sheep's mouth. They swallow. They actually do a lot of chewing here, and the saliva helps buffer the rumen. Also, when they regurgitate and ruminate, the food goes into the rumen, which is this big sort of fermenting vat that's behind the other stomachs in this picture. And in there is usually it's about 1/2 to 2/3 full of liquid, and it has a mat of like hay and fibery things on top where all the bacteria live. And that's good because they actually produce enough bacteria in there to provide protein for their diet. So anyway, this is the fermenting vat. I don't want to get too complicated until we get in a little further here. Then it goes into the reticulum, which is kind of like a pouch on the front of the rumen and pretty similar on the inside. And then it goes into the omasum. Now the omasum has like little leaves in it. Almost looks like pages of a book that's been opened up. So they're like little leaves in there, and that helps get the water out, some of the fluids out. And then it goes into the abomasum, and that is, the abomasum is kind of like our stomach. It has hydrochloric acid, and actually where it digests some of the bacteria from the rumen, which then provides nutrients. All this goes into the small intestines. That's where all the nutrients are absorbed. That's why when you have an animal that maybe had coccidiosis or something when it was younger, will have trouble absorbing the nutrients from its diet. Anyways, goes through all the intestines. There's lots of them. Comes out the back end, lands on the ground. That's manure, right? So it's like a big fermenting vat. That's how come sheep and goats and cows and deer and giraffes can all eat things like grass and hay that we can't really eat and get much nutrition out of. So they're ruminants, and they need a forage-based diet. So what is a forage? A forage is things like hay. It's usually a whole plant, like hay, haylage or baleage. We're going to talk about all these things in a little more detail in a minute. Corn silage, pasture, and some people use a forage substitute or things like cubed alfalfa, and so there's some other alternatives. And basically your grass, weeds, legumes, and browse. Now, if you don't know what browse is like leaves off of bushes, twigs, the little buds on the end. So deer and goats are browsers, and they will graze, but they are browsers, prefer browsing. And sheep are grazers, but they do browse. They do a pretty good job cleaning off the brush. So there's some of that happening. Let me see if I can find my little arrows. There we go. So we're going to talk about first about the feeds, then about the animals, and then about how to make all that match up. And then I'm going to show you lots of pictures of different feeders and feeds. So let's talk about the feeds. We're going to talk about forages, which we just mentioned, supplements, which are things that you're going to add to the diet to meet their requirements, minerals, which all animals and people need, and water. Should never forget water. It may be clear, but it's really important. So let's talk about forages. There's dried forages like hay. We're going to talk about this more too. There's silage, which is fermented, chopped, baled, might be in a bag, might be in a silo, could be in a bunk silo. It's a long, thin, sort of a trench-like thing, or it could be in a upright, old-fashioned upright silo. Don't see a lot of those anymore, but there are quite a few around here. And pasture is a forage. So that's when you let the sheep do the harvesting and the manure spreading, and the ventilation is perfect. So let's talk about hay. Hay is basically dried grass or dried legumes. Legumes are like clover, alfalfa, birchwood trefoil. It's usually a combination of grass and legumes and weeds. And you cut it when it's dry out, and you let it dry in the sun. And then you rake it together and you drive the baler over it and you make bales. So you can make square bales, big giant square bales, little square bales that you can pick up with your hands, make giant round bales of all different size, usually between 400 and 800 or 1,000 pounds. And when that hay grows back, you can cut it again. We call that second cut. And usually by then it's fairly hot and dry, and a few little bit of different plants are growing, like more legumes usually. And it's usually not as tall and stemmy, depending a little on when you did your first cut. Timing is everything when making hay, if you only could control the weather. And it tends to be softer and greener with more legumes, and therefore is a little more palatable and a little higher nutrients in general. So let's see if I got some pictures. So this is late cut hay. It's hard to take a picture of hay and make it look like what you want it to look like, but you can see all the little stems in there that are actually kind of thick. And there is some nice hay mixed in there, but they're going to have to do a lot of digging around to find it, right? So this is some second cut hay. It's reed canary grass, which is known for being stemmy, but look at all the soft leaves in there. Those are very nutritious. The sheep will pick those all out and eat them. And even if this is in the pasture, they'll go out through the reed canary and pick all the leaves off. And this is just some nice second cut. You can see there's a lot of fine, softer grasses in there. There's still some stems, but there's a lot of leaves. And it does, some of it is, you might say, well, it looks kind of brown. Well, the sun does bleach it out, and it even bleaches out the outside of the bales. So when I spread this out to look at it and take a picture, you sometimes get the brown stuff in there, but it's just as nutritious. Just doesn't look as pretty. So here's some round bales. You notice they're under cover and they're up on tires. The reason for that is you can have a lot of wastage on your hay if it's not stored inside. Now, some of you live in areas where it's a lot drier, might not be such a big deal, but if these round bales were sitting outside in New York State, they would get a lot of like 40 inches of rain over the year on them, and then they'll be wet on the bottom. You lose 3 or 4 inches on the outside, and that turns out to be about 1/3 of the volume of the bale. So most people can't actually afford to do that, even though they think they can. And it's a lot of work to put them away when you're done haying, or wrap them, or whatever you need to do. The hay bales I buy for my own farm are actually wrapped in a long line like a giant caterpillar. And they cut them apart so the ends are exposed, but they still have plastic around them, and that helps a lot. Even netting wrap helps some, but you got to set them in a dry spot. So if you're thinking of building a hay storage barn, or even just a roof that's like a pavilion at the park that you might see, a roof with poles, that's one of the fastest paybacks there is because of the amount of hay you'll save. So these are round bales, sort of regular 400-pound round bales. So let's talk about silage. Silage is fermented feed, and it's usually the same feed that you would make hay out of, only it's either made into hay when it's still wet, or it's chopped up and put in a silo while it's still wet, like 45–50% moisture. And it goes into the silo or your bag or a wrapped bale, and you try to exclude as much air as you can. And the little bacteria that are on there start eating up the sugar in the hay or in the haylage, and that it gives off acid, and that drops the pH to about 4. Once it hits about 4, that sort of stops the fermentation and preserves the hay. So there's a little skill to making silage and haylage, but if you do it correctly, it makes a really good feed, and it's really palatable. There are some things you need to be careful. If you don't do a good job, there are things like listeriosis and botulism that can be in there that can make your animals pretty sick. So there are some tricks to feeding silage, which we're going to talk about in a minute. So baleage would be a wrapped bale, and I will warn you, they're heavy, right, because there's a lot of moisture in there. So if you have a small tractor, picking up a wrapped bale can be a challenge. And they certainly couldn't roll one around like we roll around our dry bales. Haylage is chopped as in a bag or a silo. And again, it's going to vary in quality depending on who made it and what they were putting in there to begin with. Corn silage is the whole corn stalk and the ear and the grain all chopped together and made into silage. And it's higher energy. It is a really good feed, but again, you got to be careful of listeriosis. people I know that have huge sheep flocks do feed corn silage mixed with haylage, and quite successfully, but they also are feeding a lot of it at once so it never gets to spoil. So we need to keep it fresh. That means if you're going to feed haylage or silage, you need to do bunk management. You can't just keep putting more on top. You need to take out what's there and throw it away and put in fresh. Or you need to make it so they can eat off of the bale, which can also be a challenge. You only want to feed what they'll eat in a day, and you don't want to feed this in the summer. We usually wait till Christmas to start feeding baleage at the extension farm. It's got to be below refrigerator temperature. And then when it gets really cold, like it does around here in January, it was -4 last night, it tends to freeze into a solid block. And that can be a problem because the sheep are like scraping their little teeth against there trying to get it off. So it has some challenges, but it can also be fed. It will keep your sheep in good body condition because it's very palatable and they'll eat lots of it. And I mentioned listeria. So if it's a wet year and your tires have mud, get some mud onto the feed, or you do a poor job wrapping them, which I have seen that too, where people don't put enough wrap, and so it gets just like the edge of a silo where it spoils where the air gets in. Or if you're putting what's on the edge of a big silo into the mix of the feed, that's bad. Listeria, cows get listeria, but they usually don't get as sick. Sheep can get really sick, especially if they're really pregnant and can die. They get paralyzed, they get a high fever. We'll talk about that a little bit when we do health. But they can eat a lot of haylage and hay baleage, because it tastes good. And sometimes that's a problem when they're really pregnant. So here's some baleage in the feeder. You can see it's kind of soft. That's like a basket feeder where they're reaching up in there to eat. They obviously can't reach the top, so once or twice a day I have to go out there and sort of shuffle it around so they can get to it. But they do really like it. And that's kind of long. It works better with a little shorter hay. Okay, I didn't put pasture in here because we're going to have a whole lecture on pasture next week. So let's talk about, about supplements. As soon as I have a little drink, there we go. So supplements are, I'm just going to mute myself and clear my throat. Hopefully that's better. There we go. Energy grains and protein grains. And these are what you're going to use to supplement your forages. You always want to feed as much forage as you can. And then if that doesn't have enough energy, you're going to substitute back in some corn, barley, oats, wheat, something along those lines, and try to increase the energy in the diet, the concentration. If you need protein, you're going to use soybean meal. There are some other soy products. And then a lot of the byproduct feeds have a lot of protein, like distillers, grains, corn gluten, wheat mids is another good one. And brewer's grains, if you can find dry brewer's grains. So all of those things are going to be used to supplement your forage. And none of these are a mixed grain. These are all specific individual grains here I'm talking about. Oops, come on. There it goes, sorry. Sometimes we're trying to get fermentable fiber. Matter of fact, most of the time we're trying to get fermentable fiber in the diet. Sort of a big concept, but just know this, it's a good thing. And a lot of these byproduct feeds have fermentable fiber, beet pulp, cottonseed hulls, dried distillers grains, wheat mids, hominy, soy hulls, and grass, like especially early cut vegetative hay or pasture. And you won't see a lot of these things in a sheep diet, but you'll probably see distillers grains or wheat mids, soy hulls definitely. So those are good things to see in your list of ingredients in your commercial grains, or if you're mixing one up for yourself. We mix one for the extension farm that's primarily soy hulls, corn, a little bit of oats thrown in there, and soybean meal. And we used to have fish meal, but I don't think we're using that anymore. So commercial grains are the ones you buy that say on the bag, 16% sheep feed, or sheep and goat feed, sometimes they say. Usually they're formulated for goats or sheep. Goats can eat sheep grain, but sheep can't eat goat grain. And that's because of the copper. So goats need copper, but sheep can't have very much copper. So goats can eat sheep grain with a little supplementation on their minerals, but you don't want to give sheep, cow, or goat grain. And that's because of the copper. So commercial grains are nice because they're all mixed. They're you know what the percent protein is and energy. Most of them range in that 16 to 14% protein. Matches up pretty well with your basic grass hay. So around my area, at least, a lot of people feed that. When we used to have alfalfa hay, because I actually did have alfalfa hay for a while when we were doing some studies that included alfalfa hay out in our agronomy research area. And then we could just feed corn because all we needed was energy because the alfalfa had a lot of protein. So it kind of depends what you have, and we'll talk more about that in a minute. In a commercial grain, there's minerals and salt all in there. Doesn't mean you don't have to feed minerals, but they are getting some in the commercial grain. It's usually corn, soy, and byproducts. And like I said, most of them are 16, 14% protein. Sometimes you can look for a higher one if you need it. So I wanted to talk about minerals. Minerals are really important for the animals, and it's really challenging to figure out exactly what's in your feed and in your water and exactly how all the minerals are interacting. So the safest thing is to buy a good commercial mix that's formulated for the animal you have. So I mentioned most commercial grains have some in them, and I wanted to point out that salt is usually included in the mineral mix. And animals can self-regulate the amount of salt they eat. It's one of the few things that they can do in terms of knowing how much they need. So you don't want to feed other salt, because what they do is they put the salt in a certain percent, they estimate what the animal's going to eat, and then they add the other minerals so that it'll come out right. And if you feed other salt, then they won't eat enough of the mineral mix to get like the selenium and the zinc and other things that they need. So selenium is really important, and we have people from all over the country here, but in the Northeast, selenium is very limited in the soils, so we don't have any naturally occurring selenium, or very little, and so we have to maximize our supplementation of selenium in our grains, but we can't put very much in because out west, selenium is actually toxic. So it's one of those things where there's kind of a fine line, and depending on where you are, you need to find a mineral mix that matches up with your area. I think I have some examples here. So if you look at this giant chart, hopefully you can see it. Across the top are different mineral mixes that I found around the area. And then on the left-hand side are some of the different things that are in there, like salt, calcium, phosphorus, sulfur, potassium, cobalt, iodine, iron, manganese, selenium, zinc, copper. So if you look at the ag way one, the salt can be 36 to 41%. So that's a lot of salt. So they're not going to eat as much of that one. So if you notice, you go down to the selenium, that one has 90 parts per million because they aren't going to eat as much of that one. Now, the Cargill one is a mix that's meant to go into a grain mix. So let's look at the White and Patterson grain. That's the next one. And that's 30% salt and only 20 parts per million selenium. So that one might be a little low in selenium. But you will notice if you look at the calcium and phosphorus, which is 18%, and the phosphorus is 6 or 7, that's like a 2 to 1, approximately 2 to 3 to 1 ratio. And in their other grain, right, or their other mineral right next to it, it's more like 1 to 1. And so they make two grains, one that's meant to feed with grain supplements and one that's meant to feed to people, for people that are only feeding forages, like grass-fed lambs and that sort of thing. And that's because grains have a lot of phosphorus. And so the one for feeding grain, they have more calcium in to balance that out. So you're usually looking for a 2 to 1 to 1 to 1 ratio on the calcium and phosphorus. So if you go way over and look at the Poulin mix, they have not much salt at all in there. So they're going to eat, you can expect your animals to eat a lot of it. And I'm going to show you another label. But you can see there's a lot of variation. So you want to look at the label, think about what's in there. They are mixed to be safe. So I don't think you need to worry so much about that, but it's nice to have an idea what's in there. So I went on the Poulin website and actually looked at what they have under their minerals, and they have this is what they call the guaranteed analysis, which doesn't require that they put everything in there, but it does. You can see that the calcium and the phosphorus are about 1 to 1. It's a little more calcium than phosphorus, but not much. The salt is around 25%, and the selenium is 20 parts per million, which is borderline low in my opinion for our area. So, but they do have instructions, and you should look and see what it says. Like, is this meant to be fed free choice? Is it meant to be fed how much a day, so you can have an idea if your animals are getting enough. So it says this product should be fed as a sole source of salt. Right? No other salt being fed with it. Fed at 1 to 2 ounces daily to meet, or it meets or exceeds the NRC requirements for the vitamins. So if you provide 1 or 2 ounces a day, let's say you're providing 1 ounce a day and you have 32 sheep, so 16 ounces in a pound. So you need 2 pounds a day for them to eat. And the trick is feeding the minerals in a way that it won't get ruined by the humidity or the rain or the snow. And so I end up at least putting it out when I'm out there for them to eat every other day or a couple times a week. And in the summer, I have it so they can come into the barn and get the minerals. And they will go a little crazy when you first put it in if they haven't had minerals. Don't worry, they'll calm down and get used to it. It says, see where it says, caution, do not feed supplemental selenium in excess of 0.3 parts per million. And that's because in some places there's so much of it in the soils and the forages, but not here. So sometimes you can get the vet to write you a prescription to get more selenium put in your diet or in your mineral diet. And you can see all the different ingredients at the bottom. So the main thing is to buy a good commercial mix made for sheep and feed it the way it says on the label. And after they eat all those minerals, then they're going to be really thirsty.
Let's
and
see, we have a couple questions
water.
that maybe we can
Okay.
fit in before you move on to water.
Sure.
And I missed the first one was, what about using whole soybean in a mix? So their feed has whole soybeans.
You can feed whole soybeans, especially if they're roasted. They are high in fat, so you can't feed too many, and it kind of depends what animal you're feeding, but I'd have to look up the exact amount, but there is a limit to what you can feed per day per animal for whole soybeans. If they're raw, then you're really limited because there are things in raw soybeans that will make your sheep not feel good if they have too many. I have fed them, though, successfully. It's not that you can't feed them. You just need to feed them carefully. I can try to look that up for you. I can't remember off the top of my head. I don't want to give you the wrong amount because too much fat in the rumen is hard on the bacteria.
All right. Do you ever give selenium shots?
I have in the past. We now are trying to do as much, keeping the minerals in front of them and making sure it's in our grain mix if we're feeding grain, that we haven't had to give a BOCI shot or a MUSI shot, which are selenium shots, in a long time. Once in a while, but we don't routinely do it anymore. So I guess we've been fairly successful at getting the minerals into them.
If you use the Do More, do you need to add extra iron? And I probably should have showed you that chart. There was no iron in the Do More.
I don't know. I don't think of iron as something that sheep are generally lacking.
Yeah, I don't think so.
So I don't think you need to add extra.
All right.
That
catches us up on the question.
Okay. Good questions. And minerals are sort of mysterious because, like I said, it's hard to like add up all what you have in all your different feeds and figure out what you actually have because it's not that easy to measure. So because it's also in the water and different minerals tie up other minerals, and it's very confusing. Water is important, especially to growing animals, especially to animals that are producing milk. Milk is like 90% water, so if you cut off the water, they won't be producing much milk. And you want it to be water that is tasty and clean. And if you wouldn't drink out of the water, then you shouldn't expect your sheep to drink out of the water. It's not to say you don't see them drink out of some pretty icky puddles once in a while, but try to keep it as clean as you can. And there's things like yonis that are transmitted in the manure. So I have a fetish about dumping the water when there's manure in it. And I have to say, I had a llama, and if you've ever had a llama, you know that they like to pee in the same, or poop in the same place. They make a pile, and I had a llama that one day decided that the water trough was right in the way of where she wanted to poop. So every day I'd come out and there'd be like a bucket full of llama pellets in the water. And it's getting pretty soggy in my barn from me dumping the water. I finally had to fence the llama out for a while and get her over that. But we did. But try to keep the water clean. And hopefully it's something cleanable, either that you can let them drink down and then dump, or that you can scoop out with their hand, or rinse out, wash, because I will show you a picture later of a heated water that was impossible to clean, and it constantly smelled like rotting dead things. And I couldn't imagine that the sheep really liked to drink out of that. The other thing is to be careful that there's no electrical charge on your water. If you see the sheep drinking in time to the electric fencer, like putting their nose up and down, probably there's an electric charge on there shorting out from your fence. So you need to pay attention and observe your animals drinking. There's always a couple that like to drink directly out of the hose when you're trying to fill the water as well. So, and what about winter? Some of you on the list don't have this problem, but for us, water becomes very hard this time of year. So you need to have some sort of heated water, or you need to have buckets that are flexible so you can jump up and down on them at the end of a stressful day. You might need a frost-free hydrant. That's a pipe that comes up out of the ground that's attached to your water line, has a valve on the top that then when you close it, all the water drains back down 4 or 5 feet below the ground if you're around here. I run a hose up over my rafters and back down, and I water the further away pens with that, and then I drain both ends, make sure they're good and drained, and there I can use the hose all winter that way. And think about where you put the water. I'm surprised how many people I see, and they do this at work constantly, drives me crazy. We have pens of different animals. They always put the bucket on the wrong side of the pen. Like, put the bucket on the side closest to where you're getting the water if you have a choice. Just be efficient. It's sort of silly to carry water. These are some heated buckets. Very simple solution if you just have a pen of animals. Those are some market lambs I have. That's the ram sticking his nose in the picture on the side. Those are, less than $50. They last a few winters if you take good care of them. In my big water trough, I have a electric heater that sits, it has like a metal cage it sits in. There are some of the Rubbermaid tanks have a heater that actually screws into the hole where the plug goes. Those are great also. Again, you got to be careful. I can't have my fence plugged in while I have waters plugged in, because even though I have multiple ground rods, I do get a small charge on the water. So are there any more questions related to that before we start talking about animals?
I had a couple of questions here. Let me pull them up here. How would you know sheep need selenium?
Well, there's something called white muscle disease. And also low selenium can just make their whole immune system less effective. But white muscle disease normally shows up in the lambs when they're young, and they either are stiff, sometimes it affects their heart and actually kills them, or they have trouble nursing. Or what I notice usually is they're doing what we call the bunny hop, where they like hop with their back legs and walk with their front legs. That's kind of a typical sign of white muscle disease. We'll talk about that a little more in diseases, but that would be
right.
I mean, low selenium in general can make them not healthy, but you can't really tell that by looking at them.
Okay. Are there any differences or recommendations for feeding really old sheep? I don't know, Julia, yes. If they're really old sheep, do they still have teeth?
That's the big thing I would say, is they got to have something they don't have to fight for, and that they can then chew.
Sometimes they have teeth.
Maybe. So another problem is their back teeth will wear sort of side to side so that they're really sharp, and it's hard for them to chew. So I've done things like soaked alfalfa pellets, or made oatmeal, or had a goat that made it to 18, and I was like, yeah, she was eating whatever I could get her to eat. But yeah, it is a challenge, and mostly you need to protect them from competition from the younger animals that will just push them away from the feeder.
It takes them a little longer to get it down. Then Tricia said she only has 2 sheep, So she hauls water. Is there anything bad about that? No, it's probably a good exercise.
It's good exercise, except I can tell you that I have horrible arthritis in my hands and thumbs from carrying buckets over the years and pitchforking and scooping. So the only bad thing I can think is it's bad for your joints.
Okay, that catches us up.
And I'm warning you, it catches up with you later. So, okay, so let's talk about the animals we're going to feed. And we now know kind of what we have to feed them. And you might have sheep, cows, goats. There's even nutritional recommendations for chinchillas. So we're going to talk about sheep today, since this is a sheep class. Animals have a certain level of nutrient needs at maintenance, and we think of that as kind of the base level. Like they aren't pregnant, they aren't growing, they're not making milk, they're just at maintenance. And they might be eating out in the pasture, that sort of thing, but basically nothing's happening. If they're growing, that increases their requirements. If they're pregnant, that also increases their requirements. And it varies a little during the pregnancy, but especially towards the end, when the fetus is really growing, it increases their requirements quite a bit. And when they're lactating or milking or nursing their lambs, it increases their requirements even more. So you could have a growing pregnant lamb, ewe lamb, for example, or you could have, you can even have a ewe that's lactating and pregnant, although you don't have that too often usually. And the environment also affects animals, especially not so much cold, unless it's windy, but mud is surprisingly bad. Mud increases their nutrient needs because it must just be hard to walk in. And so what happens is they don't go to the feeder as many times, and it's harder for them to get there, and it takes more energy. And so mud can be a real bugaboo in your feed ration and your stress on your animals. And you'll notice they don't like cold wind and cold rain and that sort of thing, but doesn't affect their requirements as much as mud. So in those nutrient requirements, we're going to look at certain fractions. Now, think of your cereal box and all the things that are on the side of your cereal box. It has like protein and calories and fat and some of the vitamins and minerals. And so what we're going to do is send away samples of our forages and get back something that tells us all that information about what we're feeding the sheep. And we call that forage analysis. You can also send in your grain and have that analyzed. Still call it forage analysis for some reason. And so what we're going to look for is protein, the amount of protein. There's all different factions of the protein as well, but let's just stick with protein for now. Energy, which for this class we're going to use TDN, or says that's not actually a formula, although it looks like it. We're either going to use TDN or digestible fiber, but I think TDN is a lot simpler for now and works pretty well for most people. So we're going to use TDN for total digestible nutrients. Ca is calcium, P is phosphorus, and then we're going to just keep an eye on the trace minerals. Once in a while you get a sample back and you're like, that seems out of line. So let's talk about dry matter intake. This is a nutritionist thing. We're all into dry matter intake. When we do feed rations, we put all the feed on a dry matter basis, like there was no moisture in it. It's the only way we can compare it. And because animals eat a predicted amount of dry matter. So it's usually anywhere from 3 to 5% of their body weight. And sometimes it's quite a bit less than that if they're just on maintenance. And it's related to their size. And of course, certain things can affect that, like if the feed is really digestible, really palatable, they'll tend to eat more. Just like us, they like things that taste good. And the feeders can make a difference. If it's really hard for them to get the feed out of the feeder, they're going to give up after a while and go lay down. So making sure that they can get to the feed will help increase their dry matter intake. And body space can make a difference. If you think of that picture I showed you of the sheep with a rumen, now put 3 8 or 9, 10-pound lambs in there with a couple placentas and fluids, and there's just not a lot of room to put anything in the rumen. So they need, when they're pregnant, they need to have a more concentrated diet because they can't eat as much volume. And that's why dry matter is important. If they can't eat as much, but they have high requirements, then there needs to be more stuff in the food that they eat. So I put maturity there because some of my older ewes are really deep-bodied and big, and they can eat more, and they can carry lambs with no problem, and they can support their lactation because they have a lot of room to eat, and they're very impressive in what they can do. So where do you find these nutrient requirements and the dry matter intake predictions? You find the NRC book or the National Research Council book, or it's now on a CD, and I'm sure it's all online. Actually, I still like to look in my old worn out book, but there I'm sure it's online. And as a matter of fact, I attached just the sheep requirements, none of the part that explains it all, but all of the numbers at least, into a handout that I think I stuck in today's resources. So when you use a computer program, they're already built in there. You may want to adjust them a little, but they're, like, if you notice that your animals are thin even though they shouldn't be, you may want to up the energy a little. But that's why I say rations are science and an art. You know, we balance the rations to like 1/100% or a pound, and then, you know, you're in the barn and the sheep are picking through the feed and the person feeding isn't measuring carefully, and then you have to look at the animals and decide if it's working. So there's a little bit of an art to it as well, but it's not really rocket science. You should be able to figure it out. So at sheepandgoat.com, there's a couple of spreadsheets. There's 2 ration evaluators. Ration evaluators don't balance it. Like, you don't just put in the feeds and it spits out a ration. You put in what you think is going to work, and then you compare that to their requirements within the dry matter intake. If it doesn't balance, then you have to like add a little more of this and take away some of that, so the dry matter intake stays the same, but they get closer to their nutritional value that you want. So it does the math for you, but it's still sort of trial and error. And if you've done a few of them, you're probably just going to be adjusting what you did before a little bit to make it work. And you might have to do several rations, like if you have a group of lambs, a group of ewes that are about to lamb, ewes that are dry, you might have different rations for each of those types of animals. So, wow, that's bright. Don't get floored by the numbers here. Across the top are the different nutrients. If you start on the left, it's body weight of the animal, the average daily gain, because they're actually gaining and losing weight most of the time. The dry matter pounds per head that I mentioned, the dry matter intake, the body weight, percent of their body weight that they're using for the dry matter intake, the protein percent, the TDM percent, and then our vitamins and minerals. So you'll see where I have the red arrow there under lambs finishing 4 to 7 months old. And I picked 66 pounds because that's about what we wean our lambs at the extension farm. They're more like 3 months old, but that's okay. And then we want them to gain, so that's 0.65 pounds per day, which is a lot. And the dry matter we predict they'll eat is 2.9 pounds per day. So hay is about 90% dry matter, so 2.9 pounds of dry matter would be little, 3.3 pounds of hay or something around that, or grain or whatever. They're both about 90% dry matter. And the TDN is 72. That's pretty high compared to most forages. The total protein is 14.5. So now let's go down and look at maintenance for a ewe at 150 pounds. She's not gaining or losing weight. Well, 0.02. It's basically staying the same. They have 2.6 for her dry matter intake. I think she'll probably eat a little more than that, but that's all she needs. Her total protein is only 9.6 compared to that 14.5 for the growing lamb. And her TDN is 57, almost 58, which is more in line with most of our forages, and quite a bit less than the 72% needed for the lamb. And we're going to look at these in a chart, so you don't have to look at all these numbers at once. I'm just trying to show you how you find the requirements. So here's a ewe in the first 6 to 8 weeks of lactation, nursing twins. So here's a ewe that's working hard. She's probably losing a little weight every day. Look at her dry matter intake, 6.2 pounds. She got those lambs out of there. She's got a lot of room to eat now, and she's hungry because she's producing milk. And her total protein is 14.8, much more similar to the lamb. And her TDN is 64%, and that's kind of in between the other two. So let's put them all in a chart here so we can see it. So on the left, you have the ewes at maintenance, ewe with their twins, and a growing lamb. And you can see how much their dry matter intake varies. You can see how much their protein varies from 9.6 to 14.8. And their TDN goes from about 58% up to 72%. And then we're going to look at our forages in a minute and compare them. So they do range. That's why you can't necessarily feed all of your animals in one group. It's sometimes important to group them by either by their size and ability. Like you wouldn't necessarily want to put young lambs with older ewes because they'll beat on them and won't let them eat, but also because maybe their requirements don't match up. So now you got to look at the feeds you have. We talked about the forages: hay, silage, haylage, baleage, pasture. Grain supplements might be corn, soy, byproducts, commercial grain. And we're going to look at how those match up with their requirements. So we're going to send our forage analysis in, send the sample to the lab. Now in New York State, we have Dairy One Forage Lab. Other states may have their own lab or have a commercial lab. Your feed store probably knows where you could send a forage sample, or your extension person. So find out where it is in your area. You can, if you're in New York State, you can look at Dairy One. Has a great website with the different forums and things on it. You can order free mailers where you can put your forage in the mail, and it'll get to the feed or get to the laboratory. And you can also, in New York State, there's a lot of drop-off places where you can drop off forages and they get picked up, which is nice because if you're doing something like haylage, it needs to be kept cold so it doesn't spoil on the way to the lab. So you're going to get back information on protein, TDN, minerals, fiber, all the things we're looking at, and that'll help you choose your supplement. The samples, I forgot to look today at work, but they run between $24 and $36 depending on exactly what you test for and whether it's a forage or a grain. Really help you allocate your forages. Like if you have better forages, you want to know so that you can give those to the animals with the higher requirements. And that's a really important feeding concept because it saves you money on grain. So that silver rod that you see there is actually hollow. And on the right-hand end, it has sort of a serrated edge where you're going to cut into the bale, and the other end goes into your power drill. I actually have a hand crank one too, but it's pretty hard. So you can find a nice rechargeable drill. And you're going to drill that into the side of a round bale or into the end of a square bale. And you're going to sample as many as you can stand. They want you to sample 20 out of each batch of hay that you have. And each time you sample, you can't go all the way in usually. So you take it out and you take the end off and you dump the little sample, which are about ½ inch to 1 inch long pieces that you cored out of the hay. You're going to put those into a bucket, stir them up, and stuff the sample bag that's going to the lab. Push all the air out, mark it with your sample number, like it's the Hodge Farm sample on January 21st, first cut hay, so that they can label it for you. And so it matches up with what you put in on the form. So it's a lot of work, but it isn't really hard. It's just, it's a challenge sometimes to climbing around in the hay mow getting all the samples, but whatever you can get will be better than nothing. And I just put that gallon jug there so you could sort of get an idea of the size. That's a hay. Now we lend one out from our office. Some of the feed companies will have one they'll lend you. You can purchase one from Penn State. It's called a Penn State Forage Sampler. If you Google that, you can buy a new one. I had to buy new ends for mine, but the middle was still good. So this is what you get back from Dairy One. And I assume you'll get something similar. Now, some of you looked at these online before class. You can see I have circled there, first cut early hay. And if you go over on the far right, where it says dry matter at the top of the column, that's the numbers we're going to use for balancing the ration. You can see that it's, if you look in the next column over, you can see that it's about 90–91% dry matter. So it's pretty dry, which is good. You want your hay to be dry. But you can see the crude protein, where the adjusted crude protein is 11. So then we have two different groups of animals that needed 14% hay. So that's going to be, they would be short on protein with this hay. The TDN is about 60, so that was a little better. And you can see there's lots of stuff in between there, but tonight we're just going to focus on the protein and the energy so we don't just confuse everybody. I will tell you that the calcium and phosphorus in this one look very typical of a grass hay by what's there. Oops. There's our next feed is first cut mature hay. We probably cut this later. It doesn't have the cutting date on it. Sometimes I put the cutting date. It's only 9.2% protein and only 48% TDN. So that TDN is actually below all of the recommendations that we looked at. And sometimes you can get away with that if you can get them to eat a little more by making it easy for them to get lots of feed and making it taste better by doing things like roto cutting it. Roto cutting is usually it's done actually when you're baling or making silage, but you cut the hay into shorter pieces because lake cut hay is usually really tall. I mean, sometimes it's taller than me, and I'm pretty tall. So cutting it makes it a lot easier for the animals to pick out the good stuff and to get it out of the feeder. So let's look at the second cut round bales. It's mixed mostly grass still, but now it's the softer, greener stuff. It has more legumes. And if you look at the blue arrow that says adjusted crude protein is 16%. So that's pretty good feed. It's actually higher in protein than we need for any of our groups. And the TDN is 63. So that's very high also. It's high for grass hay, I should say. And if you look down below, see that the calcium is 0.9, and in our other ones it was more like 0.6. To me that says there's a little more clover or other legumes in there. They tend to be higher in calcium. So here I am harping on dry matter intake again. They can only eat so much in a day, so you need to get the nutrients they need in that amount of space or amount of feed. And the amount can vary with their size, demand, forage type, and it's usually 3 to 5% of their body weight. And you want to maximize dry matter intake, and we'll talk some more about that. So now what do? We start by feeding all the forage you can. So if you're going to give 100% of your forage and see what's missing. And then what you're going to do is substitute in feeds. So you might need protein, energy, fiber, minerals, etc. So what measurement do you use for energy? We're going to use TDN. If you're doing cows, you'd use NEL, dairy cows, I mean. There's also net energy of maintenance, net energy of growth, and you can use fermentable NDF as well. But let's stick to TDN tonight. So we're back to our little chart here. If you look at the animals across the top, or the animal, and then it's a U on maintenance. Her dry matter intake's 2.6 pounds. Her protein requirement is 9.6%, and her TDN is 57%. So the first cut early hay was 11% protein and 60% TDN, and so that would meet her requirements. She could eat just hay with, you'd have to feed her minerals, so she got enough salt and other trace minerals, but she would get by on that hay pretty nicely. The first cut mature hay is a little low in protein, and it's quite a bit low in TDN, so if she's really just on maintenance, she could survive on that, but it wouldn't be ideal. You might need to supplement a little energy, especially. And the second cut round bale would be overkill. It's way more protein than she needs and more TDN. She'd probably do great on it. She'd love it. She'd eat a lot. And she might even get a little chunky. I fed really nice second cut square bales to my hair sheep one winter, and I had to actually limit feed them to keep them from getting too fat. And even then they got so fat that I had trouble at lambing time. Okay, let's look at the ewe nursing twins. So she can eat more, but it's still going to have to be 14.8% protein and 64% TDN. So the first cut early hay is a little low in both of those things. The first cut mature hay is really low, like she would lose weight, she probably would not make as much milk, and her lambs would not grow as well. And I did want to mention, I did look up fiber nutrition today for animals that produce fiber, and it's really important to feed your ewes right while they're pregnant, because the little hair follicles or wool follicles are forming on the lambs while they're inside the mother. And so you don't want to be shorting the mother before birth or after or right after when the lambs are really developing all those things. It was kind of interesting. Anyway, the second cut round bales has a little extra protein and just about enough TDN, and probably she would do okay on that. Now, our ewes raise twins on pasture, which their intake is really high because it's so high in moisture, and it usually is at least that much protein and at least that much TDN. And they do very well. They sometimes get a little thin in the middle of the summer when it's dry. So let's look at the lambs that are growing. So these lambs, let's assume they're in a pen and we're feeding them. They eat about 3 pounds of dry matter. Their protein requirement is 14.5%, and their TDN is about 72%. So that first cut early hay with its 11 and 60 are a little low, quite a bit low, actually. So if you were trying to grow lambs on that, they don't grow that well. And I can tell you that that's about what we feed our flock this time of year, well, earlier in the year especially. And we have our ewe lambs in there, and they don't grow that well. And I don't really like the system. I would prefer to keep my ewe lambs separate and feed them a little better and breed them to lamb at a year. But what we end up doing is not feeding them that well and then holding them till the next year. So it's not ideal. I think it'd be better to feed them what their requirements are. First cut mature, definitely too low. The second cut round, they would do pretty well on that. They might need a little extra energy. And that could just be because there's enough protein, you could probably get away with feeding just some corn, cracked corn or whole corn to get their energy up. I should try that and see how much it would actually take to get them up to the 72% TDN and tell you maybe I can do that next year. Now, don't laugh, but this is a poster that was made by a 4-H kid in Jefferson County, which is the next county over, and I was doing a sheep project with them. And it's actually a really well done poster and kind of nice to look at because it's actually hand done. And you can see on the left side is TDN, and across the bottom are the months of the year. And their requirements are on here for 2 different size. Well, one's a ewe and one's a goat. The red is the ewe, and it's for lambing in April, and assuming she's having twins. So if you look in January and February, her requirements are pretty basic. And then as she gets closer to lambing, that last month or 2 before lambing, her requirement goes up. And then after she lambs, it comes down a little, but is still higher than maintenance. And then it looks to me like they weaned the lambs in July. And then she's on maintenance for August, September, October. And then her requirements go up a little. They increase them a little during breeding and gestation, but not a lot above maintenance. So you can sort of see the cycle of what they need during that time. So what about pasture? Pasture can be a great asset. Sheep really like pasture. My sheep always look incredibly bored in the winter. They kind of stare out at the pasture and wish they could go out there. And I don't think they're going to eat snow, but pasture is a great asset if you can manage it. Well-managed rotational pasture in the northeast would have vegetative grasses, legumes, weeds. It's high in protein and energy. Pasturing is not necessarily less work or easier if you do a good job at it. You're going to be moving fences around to take advantage of rotation and different types of feeds. We're going to talk more about that next week in detail, but can be confounded by the weather. I had to pull my sheep right off the pasture for 2 weeks last year and feed them round bales right in the middle of lamb, when they're nursing their lambs, which was not great because the hay was not really high enough in nutrients for what they were doing. So they lost a little weight. They came back during the pasture season. I didn't have a good way to feed them grain where they were without injuring the lambs. So they had to eat just hay. So the weather, pasture is like a constant adjustment because of the weather. And I wanted to remind you that your barnyard is not really a pasture. A pasture is more of a controlled way of harvesting the feed off in your fields. So you can sample your pasture. We do it every summer. We cut different squares. We have a little metal frame that we throw, and then wherever it lands, we pull all the feed up and cut it off and squish it into the bag and put it in the fridge, and then send it to or take it to the drop-off place and get it analyzed. And maybe I can find one of those analyses from last summer and put it in. And it varies a lot, like the hay does. Like when it goes to seed and gets tall, it goes down in the nutrients, and later in the summer, after it's been mowed or hayed off or pastured off, it improves again. And we'll talk about that some more. It does change kind of all the time, so you need to monitor that. And we talked about the supplements that we can use to supplement them: energy grains, protein grains, commercially formulated grains made for sheep or goats. And they do include some minerals, but you do need to feed minerals in addition. And I talked about fermentable fiber. It's a good thing. But beet pulp, cottonseed hulls, distiller grains. So if your feed company's making a ration for you, if you tell them you want a 16% high energy sheep feed, they might be able to put something together for you. Be sure it's got some of these things in it, especially soy hulls. I'm going to skip over some of this. I will tell you that I worked through the example for our baleage, and it came out to 34% fermentable fiber. We don't really have a great way to measure fermentable fiber, so we're sort of getting to it by doing all these formulas with the other things that are on the forage analysis. And we were shooting for 35%, so the baleage was actually a pretty good feed, and explains why they had a high intake. A high fermentable fiber in your diet encourages dry matter intake. So how are you going to balance your ration? Not the fermentable fiber part, but the rest of it. You can use those computer rations that I put up there that are at the Maryland website. You can do a Pearson square, which is actually pretty easy. And I think we used to have a handout, Lynn, but I don't think it's in there anymore. We'll have to find one and get it in there. But you can go on YouTube and look up Pearson square, and you can put your two different feeds on the corners of the Pearson square. Like if one's 14% protein, say you're using corn and it's only 10% protein, and you can then put in the amounts and figure out what it takes to get what you want. So Pearson square, that you can do with a paper and pencil. And then once you've balanced for protein, then you need to add up the two feeds and see if it matches for the energy. It's a lot of math, a lot of fractions, a whole nother class to teach you how to actually do it, but I want you to know it is possible. And if you're good at math, it isn't that hard to do. Also wanted to point out that there's 3 rations. The one you figure out, and we balance those. You can balance them really close, like I say, to the 100th of a pound. And then there's who feeds it. And in my case at work, we have all these students feeding, and my scoop versus their scoop. We do, at the beginning of the year, I make them all do a scoop, and we weigh them so we know how many pounds are in a scoop. But then watching them, they don't do it that carefully, or they aren't paying attention, or they misread the instructions. Like when you say 3 scoops twice a day, does that mean each animal gets 3 scoops twice a day, or the pen gets 3 scoops twice a day? It's surprisingly hard to write out chores so that someone else can understand them. So there's the one someone else feeds, and then you put it out there, and they step in the thing, and they pick through and take all the cracked corn out, and then they, if it's a total mixed ration, they sometimes are sorting out the corn cobs, say. So then there's the one the animal actually eats. So we try. You can't make it perfect, but you have to pay attention to all of these things. And I want to talk about body condition, because that's a good way to tell if your ration is working. You really don't want your animals too fat or too thin. So body condition means the fatness of the animal, amount of fat on your animal. And it's really challenging with wool sheep to tell if they're fat or thin, so you really need to touch them. And my wool sheep at work are unusually friendly, so excuse me, while they're at the feeder, I can easily go around and put my hand flat on their back and rub it back and forth, see if I can feel their backbone. I can move back and feel their hips and pins. And we have some pretty good handouts on body condition scoring in the resources. So you might
See,
need to adjust your ration.
Teresa had a question that fits in there. I said I'm assuming that she meant to breeding. She said, if ewe lambs are fed too fat, do you have to wait another year? I'm assuming you might be questioning whether or not you can get them bred.
They will usually breed, but they aren't growing. I don't want them, I would like them to be at least 3/4 of their mature weight when I breed them. And since we throw them back out with the ewes, they don't always get to that size by breeding time. And then even then you could get away with it if you separated them and fed them for the first part of their pregnancy and got them big enough, but I just worry about lambing. They aren't big enough to lamb and take good care of their lamb. So yeah, ideally I would separate my ewe lambs and feed them in a separate pen. Make sure they were getting what they needed. Then they should easily be able to lamb at a year.
Her comment was if they get them too fat, though.
Oh, too fat? I don't know. I think they'll probably slim down once they're pregnant and moving around.
Okay.
It is hard to lamb an animal that's too fat. Hopefully they're getting enough protein so they're growing as well as putting on fat. But too fat is not good. Too thin is not good. A little thin is better than too fat, as far as lambing goes afterwards. And things like pregnancy toxemia or ketosis. And then there's other things that affect your ration. So you're balancing it really nice, but your feeder type makes a big difference. You need a feeder that's easy to clean, easy to fill in all weather, and we'll talk about some examples of that in a minute. It needs to be the correct size and height. If you watch sheep try to eat out of a cow round bale feeder, they end up climbing in usually. It's not ideal. Make sure there's enough bunk space. Like, can all the sheep eat at once? Especially if you're feeding grain, like once a day or twice a day or something. They need to all be able to get up there at once. And they do vary in size. Like when they're really pregnant, we can only fit like 4 sheep at the feeder. When they've just been sheared and there's no lambs inside them, you can fit closer to 8 sheep at the feeder. So pay attention to that. Feeder locations important. Is there snow getting in the feeder and keeping them from getting to the feed? Is it muddy? Is it fillable in all weather? And can the sheep actually get to it in all weather? Also, your group size and the different sizes within the group make a difference. Big animals tend to push the little ones out. So keep that in mind. The little ones get littler and the bigger ones get bigger instead of them all growing together. So let's take a look at this feeder. This is a round bale feeder. These are some of the extension sheep. And those panels that the sheep have their heads through slide in. So when you put a bale in, you slide those apart. You drop the bale in and then they slowly work it in. But I'll tell you that you do need to pull those out and pull the feed up. There's no feeder that I found that doesn't require a little bit of feed management. Now this feeder is great inside. Outside at this time of year, and we have like a foot to 18 inches of snow that all fell in the last few days. And it would fill up that feeder and it would freeze. They'd push against it, it would pack in and they wouldn't be able to slide the feeder. So that's a pretty good feeder, but it does not work well outside in the winter. Okay, there's a basket type feeder. There's some nice deep bodied ewes for you. And those are pretty good. They do waste quite a bit of feed, and we actually put like a cattle panel on the inside of them and put the hay on top of it. We have only, I think we lost one sheep who decided to stick her head in there right when we dropped the bale in, unfortunately. So there's also no sheep-proof feeder. They can usually find a way to murder themselves in the feeder, but that was holding the baleage. Those are nice in some ways because the feed's up off the ground. This is the type of feeder we're using now. That one is just made out of cattle panels. And that was a big dry round bale that I put out. Looks like either pasture isn't quite there yet or it's later and it's all gone. Hair sheep have nice pointy heads and they can fit their heads through and eat through those feeders. You might have to make bigger holes if you have bigger sheep. That's the same idea, but that's the Premier feeders from Premier 1. They are sturdier and they have a little smaller squares, but then they have bigger squares for them to reach through and eat. I feed the bales on the side because I have really big bales, and I find them easier to feed that way. Most people feed them up on their end. Those are my 2 guard dogs in the background there. So these are those folded up, which is kind of nice. When you're done, you can fold them up. Usually we tie them so they don't flop over onto an animal. And you can see the difference. The Premier ones are very sturdy. They're also very heavy if you have to carry them around your barnyard to put them around the bales. The other ones are lighter, but they do bend and they do break off the cross pieces eventually. But they're easy to replace as well. They also make great dog beds, according to Gigi. This is what happens when you feed a feeder without a bale, I'm sorry, without a feeder. And we tended to feed our haylage without a feeder because we found they had trouble getting it out of the feeder. And Charlie, our farm manager, calls that bed and breakfast, where they are bedding themselves and eating. When we had enough hay to waste that much, it worked out pretty well. And that's Peaches, the guard dog, laying there. The other problem is the sheep are not going to eat that bale because the dog is basically guarding it. She's just sleeping there, but they're being careful. She's still there. So you can see the sheep eating the bale outside in the winter. Honestly, climate change has created much wetter winters for us up here, and I now put a tarp over a lot of my bales within the feeder, a small tarp, and I use carabiners and clip it over the top because round bales sitting out and getting rained on and then warming up and then getting cold and getting rained on, snowed on, it really ruins a lot of the hay. So we've been actually feeding our bales inside the barn lately. It's okay, now that it's gotten cold, we could probably feed them all outside. That's a frozen bale of haylage, and they are picking at it, but ideally you'd have a bale saw and you'd cut it down the middle and lay it open. They would just devour it. I've showed you this picture before. This is a super efficient way to feed sheep. You see how they're all standing up on a step, and that keeps them from backing up and pooping in the feeder. And they drive down the middle and put in it's mostly different silage and haylage and grain mixed together to meet their requirements. So some more things that affect your ration: bunk space. Mentioned that. And now the theory is if you always have food there, like always have forage out, that if they can't get in there when everybody else is up there, they'll go eat later. But I find that they tend to all eat together and then all lay down together. And so ideally you'd have enough space for all of them to eat at once if possible. And helps with the competition. Timing is important. Do you go and fluff the hay around in the feeder? You'll find a lot of them will get up and eat. It'll help increase their dry matter intake. Or if you feed them a couple times a day, you pull down the feed. Anything that shuffles the feed around gets them interested in eating again. And again, I mentioned the person doing the feeding is really important. And they don't realize, I have to stress this with the students all the time, that might be only a little off, but a little off over 6 months adds up to a lot. So it pays to be fussy when you're feeding. This is one of my students from the Bronx who decided to take a work-study job at the farm just to learn more about it. It's really interesting working with her. She really liked it during the good weather and really didn't like it during the cold weather. But these are Premier feeders that we built, and the plans, you can get the plans from Premier. You can walk down the middle of them, which is kind of nice, because if you've ever walked down with a bucket of grain into a group of sheep, you know that you get mobbed and trampled. And so being able to walk down the middle of the feeders is a good thing. Though you can put hay in those feeders, but then when you go to feed the grain, you pretty much have to take the hay out or push it all to one end. That's just looking down the feeder so you can see them eating there. And that's just a wide open, we call that the loafing barn because it was originally a cattle barn. It's just a wide open barn. I put this in because those are such cute lamb butts, actually. Now, that's a creep feeder. And those lambs are actually in a pen with their mothers, but we didn't want the mothers to have any more grain because we were weaning them or taking the lambs away, so we want them to dry up. And so the lambs can fit through those little slots. Those are those little uprights roll. return so that when they walk through, they can kind of squish their way through. And we can feed them grain, but the mother sheep can't get it. And that's called a creep feeder. They use them for cattle as well. And those are little spoiled lambs that were born in February. Which we're about to have a few more of because every September when I go away for the weekend, the ram gets out and breeds a couple of ewes. This is a mineral feeder I made. Just cut a hole in the side of a plastic barrel. And unfortunately, I broke the handle off, so I'm tied to the nubs there. And there's one bad thing in this picture, and that's those loops of baling twine hanging there where I tied it on. Those loops need to be cut because something could get a foot or something through there. Works pretty good, keeps the minerals off the ground at least. Ideally, you'd be actually hanging it up somewhere. I couldn't find a good spot to hang it. This is a heated water. It's originally meant for cows. The sheep can reach it. We've done away with it. It's actually still sitting in the barn, but it's not connected because it was so hard to clean, and it, like say, it smelled like rotting dead animals in there, even though there were no dead animals in there. But trying to clean it out was really difficult. This feeder, this little silver feeder or water, is a heated water, and that whole cover flips right up, or you can just take your hand and scoop the water out, and it refills from underneath. And in the winter, we use like a neoprene glove or a rubber glove and scoop it out. I really like those. Those are called Nelson waters. And I know we're not supposed to plug specific products, but those work really well if you install them correctly. And next to that is a frost-free hydrant. It has a handle on the top that lifts up. And where it's orange there, the water comes out. And then when you close it, the water drains back down. And most of the time, we can keep those from freezing. And I had to put a little fence around it because the sheep like to use it to itch. And they even turned the water on. And one day came in and found the water running. This is a different kind of a feed setup. This is an old dairy stanchion barn. You can see behind the ewes is a gutter. We actually cleaned the barn out every Saturday by running the gutter. And the sheep are eating through just between boards. And I eventually ran yellow nylon rope up and down so that they had to reach through between the rope. And there's one problem with this setup the way it is there is the lambs all could fit through the slots and they had a good time in the feed bunk eating. It wasn't terrible, but it could get pretty messy if you had a bunch of lambs, but it worked. And actually the up and down, when I put the ropes through up and down on the feeder, that pretty much kept the lambs in. This is in my barn. Those are in the middle, they're plastic feeders. They have a half circle, like a bowl-shaped black plastic bottom that'll hold grain or hay. And then those are hay racks that go on top. And they're very heavy to move around by yourself. You can take the hay rack off and move them. They do work pretty well. I now have them where I can reach to throw the hay in from the alley, which works pretty well. And you see some wooden feeders over on the side. Those old wooden feeders had those for ages, and it's amazing how well they hold up. See a little mud outside too. Looks like must be spring. There's a little shot of that feeder, wooden feeder, and then you can see the bottom and the far end there towards the end of the barn is one of the black plastic bowl-shaped feeders, but without a hay rack. And then there's a little square feeder made out of wood, and that was great for square bales. You could just drop a square bale in there. So there's lots of variations. And that's my llama, Brandy, and she does like snacks. And that's her son actually behind her. So I'm open for questions.
Betsy, there was one. There was a comment, and I think this is when you were doing the bale feeders. So, do you want the sheep to be able to put their heads in and have bigger space in the feeder, or smaller holes where they waste less hay? I'm not sure there's a great answer for that.
Yeah, I'm not sure there's a good answer.
Either way.
I like them to be able to reach in because we call it fluffing the hay. You have to open the feeder once in a while and fluff it around, but it looks like Swiss cheese when they've all been sticking their heads through and eating. And if the holes are too small, it depends a little on your feed. Like if I was putting second cut into a feeder like that, the small holes are perfect because the hay is soft and they can pull it through the holes. And they'll push the feeder forward too. It'll collapse like around the bale. if you put the feeder on too tight, like sometimes I have an extra big bale and we'll squeeze those feeder around there and clip it on. They can't hardly get the hay out because it's like held in by the feeder. So you do need to do a little adjusting. I made all different size panels when I cut apart the cattle panels. So if you buy a 16-foot cattle panel and you cut it in panels that have like 4 squares or 5 squares, and then you have to sort of grind the ends so that where you cut it off so that it isn't sharp. And then you can buy little spiral spring-looking things from Premier, or you can just clip them together with carabiners, or you can tie them with string. But then you can adjust how many panels are on there and how tight it is. I mean, 6 panels is ideal because the middle can squish in and it's like a figure 8 then.
One thing we haven't mentioned is obviously if you have breeds with horns or you have goats, that's something else to consider. And you can have, too small. I've had lambs get their heads stuck in the 4x4 one. So you have to kind of think about that. And then there's a question there, can sheep break feeders? They can certainly, and as Betsy said, there's always ways for them to get stuck in things.
Well, they like to stand on those ones made out of the panels, and they'll stand on the cross pieces and reach in and eat off the top, kind of. And they'll slowly break those down.
Well, and that also can potentially be an issue if they're really heavily bred, where you might get some prolapse kind of things.
Right. You don't want them standing with their butt down and their head up when they're real pregnant.
When they're real pregnant. If you have a flock, some of whom are pregnant and some are not, what are the issues of feeding together?
As long as they all have room to eat, they should be okay.
It might be whether or not you can meet the nutritional demands, though.
True.
Without getting your unbred ones
too fat,
too heavy if you're supplementing
right.
to meet the needs of the really heavily bred ones.
For me, I guess the only time I have that is when there's ewe lambs in with them that aren't bred, and their requirements are a little higher anyways.
Right.
But you're right. If you were doing multiple time of year lambing or something where you had some that were pregnant and some were on maintenance, you'd probably want to separate them and feed the ones that are pregnant a little better.
Right. And then Mike had shared earlier on, have you ever evaluated the mineral feeders from freechoice.com? It basically offers all the minerals to the sheep freely and allows them to get the needed minerals based on what's absent from the diet. So I think it's kind of self-selection.
Right. They've showed in research that doesn't really work.
Yeah. There are some minerals that really are not very palatable, or others that are really small quantities. So it may be challenging. I have heard some producers that do offer multiple types and allow free choice, but probably if you can find a good quality mix for your region or the area you're in,
go
it's
for it.
A little bit better.
Yeah, definitely.
More efficient way.
It's pretty hard to have a whole bunch of different minerals sitting out too. I mean, they get ruined so easily. Just by the humidity in the air, or by the animals sticking their nose in there and then in the water and then back in the minerals. And I have had people that wanted to feed like bicarb also, which you shouldn't really need unless you really are feeding them a high power ration, like really, really rich. For usually a sheep ration, you don't need to feed bicarb with that. It's got enough fiber and to keep their rumen at a normal pH.
If all the ewes are in maintenance stage and some are big, so we got Lincolns and Tunis's here, and some are small fins, would you feed them together or separate by size?
If they can all get to the feed and there's enough feed for everybody, they're probably okay together.
Yeah. And that, just kind of, again, going back to that body conditioning scoring and be able to get your hands on them. So especially with the wool breeds. But even the hair sheep in the wintertime,
they're pretty fluffy.
They may look different than, so you really kind of have to spend a little time making sure you're getting your hands on them.
Well, and if you notice that you've got a sheep or two that are really thin compared to everybody else, there's probably something going on. They're lame, they got a sore foot, so they aren't eating. They've got a tooth problem. They might have yonis. They might have an abscess in their throat. I mean, it could be a lot of different things. But if everybody else looks chunky and happy, and then you got one that's skinny, there's probably something wrong. Maybe she doesn't feel good for some reason, or can't get to the feed, or so it's a good thing to keep an eye on anyways. Anybody that doesn't look like the rest of the group.
Great. That's what we had for questions.
Great.
If there's others.
You know, I forgot to look and see what people were supposed to do for next week.
Okay, so Julia, hopefully that answered your question about, you came back with what about sheep that are consistently thinner. So again,
Well,
those two that are thin, perhaps there's something else going on there with those animals. But you can also watch to see whether or not it can be even as much as if there's not enough feed space, are they being pushed away from the feed? But certainly if they're consistently thinner, there may be some other health issues going on with those two.
I'd check their teeth first.
Ah, yes, good point.
I have two 10-year-old
if they're
sheep,
older,
and they have no front teeth at all. And they're surprisingly good, but that isn't always the case. Yeah, or, you know, are they getting pushed away by more aggressive animals?
Yeah.
Do you have enough feed in the feeder so that when everybody else is done, they can still get some? I think sometimes older animals sometimes just have a hard time keeping weight on, like really older animals. That would be, and I'd be watching out for yonis as well. Parasites could do that too, although for us in the winter, parasites are not normally a problem. I'm not sure what part of the country that came from, but check them out.
Okay.
So I know next week we're talking about pasture, predators, and parasites, all of which could be a lecture on their own. So I will try to cram in as much as I can. I think I gave you some things about guard dogs to read and tell me about your predator situations. And I will try to write about mine because I've had a lot of experience both with predators and guard animals. That's one of them you're looking at on the screen, as a matter of fact. She's a pretty good guard llama. And she eats everything that the sheep eat, so she's really handy. Okay, if there's no other questions,
well said.
it's 8:28.
There are some activities and forums to participate in this week. And then the week 3 resources will be open on Monday to start getting those pieces of information. So if you haven't already, again, make sure you're participating in the forums and look through the resources. And if you have any questions between now and next week, you know how to get a hold of Betsy and I.
Right, and feel free to write. I know we have like a feeding forum in this week. Feel free to write comments in there and questions, because usually I go back through. I don't always get to do it immediately when you send something in, but try to set aside a little time every week to go back and answer those. So hopefully we didn't confuse you totally trying to teach you so much feeding stuff in one night, but feeding is really important. So good luck, and we'll see you next week.
Great. Good night, everyone.
I'll take off my video and wave hi to everybody. Good night.
Good night.